My name is Elena Whitmore, and this began in Boston, in a narrow brick townhouse on Marlborough Street that had once felt like a promise fulfilled. Graham and I used to joke that every polished floorboard, every framed print, every lamp we chose together was another piece of our marriage made visible. I had believed that. I had believed in the quiet strength of ordinary love, in shared grocery lists and folded laundry and Sunday mornings with coffee cooling between us. I had believed that a life built carefully was a life built securely. That belief began to die before dawn. I woke with a small shiver and reached instinctively across the bed. My hand met cold sheets. For a second, still trapped between sleep and waking, I assumed Graham had gone downstairs for water or stepped into the bathroom. He had restless nights sometimes. He said the pressure at work followed him home, that his mind stayed wired long after midnight. I had learned not to ask too many questions when he looked tired. I turned onto my back and stared into the darkness. The room was faintly silver with moonlight leaking through the curtains. Everything looked familiar. The dresser, the armchair in the corner, Graham's suit jacket hanging over the closet door. Nothing seemed wrong. Then I heard his voice. Low. Careful. Almost tender. I sat up slowly, every muscle tightening. It was coming from somewhere beyond the bedroom, maybe the hallway, maybe the stairs. I could not make out every word at first. It was the tone that made my stomach twist. Graham had taken late-night calls before, but never like this. Never with that softness. Never like a man trying not to be overheard. I slid out of bed and stepped onto the cold hardwood floor. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the heating and the murmur of his voice. I moved toward the bedroom door and left it open just enough to listen. No, he whispered. She still doesn't know anything. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The sentence went through me like ice water. I stood there in the dim hallway, one hand pressed against the doorframe, feeling my heart slam so hard it almost hurt. I waited for more. I needed more. Some explanation. Some sentence that would soften what I had just heard. Graham's voice came again, too low to catch clearly. No, not yet. A pause. I said I'll handle it. Handle what? Handle me? I leaned forward, straining to hear, but the words blurred together. I could tell he was trying to calm the other person down. His tone had that smooth, controlled quality I had once admired in him, the one that made clients trust him and strangers open up too easily. Tonight it felt different. Tonight it sounded rehearsed. Footsteps moved faintly against the floorboards. My pulse spiked. He was coming back. I hurried into bed, pulled the comforter up to my chest, and shut my eyes just as the bedroom door opened. The room shifted with his presence. Mattress springs dipped beneath his weight a second later. I kept my breathing slow, even, pretending to be asleep. For a few moments, he said nothing. Then he exhaled quietly, the sound of a man slipping back into place. I turned toward him, blinking as if I had just woken. Graham. He was sitting against the headboard, phone in hand. The screen glow lit one side of his face before he locked it and set it down. Sorry, he said softly. Did I wake you? I rubbed my eyes. I reached over and you were gone. He gave me a small smile. Couldn't sleep. You were on the phone. He did not hesitate. Work. At 4 in the morning? He shrugged lightly. London client. Time difference. I looked at him in the dark. You sounded upset. I wasn't upset. His voice stayed calm. Just trying to settle something before it became a bigger issue. There was not a single crack in his expression. That unsettled me more than anything. Graham had always lied beautifully when the truth inconvenienced him. Small lies, harmless ones, I used to think. I'm almost home. I already ate. Nothing's wrong. But now, lying beside him, I suddenly wondered how many times he had looked me in the eye and rewritten reality without blinking. I forced a weak smile. You could have woken me. For a boring work call? He brushed a hand over my arm. Go back to sleep, Elena. His touch used to comfort me. That night it felt like a test. I nodded and turned away, but sleep never came back. I lay still, staring into the darkness, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing as he drifted off beside me. Mine stayed shallow, uneven. My mind began reaching backward, pulling up moments I had dismissed. The way Graham had started taking his phone into every room, even the shower. The way he tilted the screen away from me whenever a message came in. The dinners he cancelled at the last minute. The distracted hums when I tried to tell him about my day. The strange shift in his eyes whenever I mentioned money, property, or long-term plans. At the time, I had explained it all away. Stress, fatigue, marriage settling into routine. I had told myself every relationship changed. I had told myself distance did not mean danger. Now, lying there in the dark, I heard that sentence again. She still doesn't know anything. By the time weak morning light began filling the room, I felt like someone else had been born inside my body overnight. Graham was still asleep, one arm thrown across my pillow, his face relaxed and innocent in the pale dawn. For one painful second I looked at him and saw the man I had married. The man who danced with me barefoot in this same bedroom after we first moved in. The man who kissed my forehead at my mother's funeral. The man who once said, "Whatever happens, it's you and me." My throat tightened. Then another thought came, sharper than grief. Maybe it had not been me and him for a very long time. I slipped out of bed quietly and went downstairs to the kitchen. The house felt different in the morning, as if the walls themselves knew something I did not. I stood at the counter, staring at the coffee machine without turning it on. A few minutes later, I heard his footsteps on the stairs. "Morning," Graham said. I turned. He looked freshly composed, hair damp from the shower, shirt sleeves rolled neatly, like a man stepping into another normal day. "Morning," I answered. He opened the refrigerator. "You're up early. So are you." He glanced over his shoulder and smiled faintly. "Couldn't get back to sleep after that call." I folded my arms. "That important?" He took out the milk. "Comes with the job." I watched him move around the kitchen with effortless ease, and for the first time in my marriage, I saw performance where I used to see familiarity. "Who was it?" I asked. He poured coffee into a mug. "I told you. A client." "What client?" He looked at me then, really looked at me. Not warmly, not lovingly, more like he was measuring how far to push. "Elena," he said, almost amused. "Since when do you care about my clients? Since when do you whisper to strangers about me before sunrise?" But I did not say that. Not yet. Instead, I held his gaze and said, "Since one of them made you lie to my face." The kitchen went quiet. He set his mug down slowly. "I'm not doing this first thing in the morning." "Doing what?" "This." He gestured between us. "Looking for drama where there isn't any." Something in me recoiled at the ease of it, the way he turned suspicion into my flaw. I gave a short nod. "Right. Maybe I'm just tired." His expression softened instantly, as if that was the answer he wanted. "That's probably all it is." He stepped closer and kissed my temple. "Don't work yourself up over nothing." "Nothing." I stood there after he walked away, listening to his footsteps retreat down the hall, and understood something that hollowed me out from the inside. Betrayal did not always begin with infidelity or divorce papers or emptied bank accounts. Sometimes it began the first time a person decided your trust was a tool. And by that morning, though I did not know the full shape of what was coming, I knew one thing with frightening certainty. I was no longer a wife waking inside a safe marriage. I was a woman standing at the edge of an unseen cliff, smiling at the man beside her while realizing he might already have decided to let her fall. The next morning, my hands were still trembling when I opened my laptop at the kitchen counter. The Boston sunrise stretched pale gold across the marble surface, lighting the room in a quiet, almost innocent glow. Normally mornings in our townhouse felt calm, coffee brewing, the distant sound of traffic waking the city, Graham humming absent-mindedly while reading emails. But that morning nothing felt ordinary. My mind kept replaying the words I had heard in the dark. She still doesn't know anything. I swallowed hard and logged into our joint banking account. Graham had always handled most of the financial management in our marriage. I handled investments and my personal accounts, but the daily logistics, the mortgage payments, utilities, subscriptions, those had gradually become his system. At the time I had thought it was practical. Now I wondered if it had simply been convenient. The transaction page loaded slowly. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Mortgage payment, electricity, insurance. Then I noticed a withdrawal. $1,200. 2 weeks earlier. I frowned. I scrolled further. Another. $850. 3 weeks before that. Then another. $2,000. And another. $500. My pulse began to climb. I leaned closer to the screen, scanning the timeline carefully. The withdrawals stretched back almost 4 months. None of them were large enough to draw immediate attention. But together, they formed a pattern, steady, deliberate, and hidden within our normal expenses. By the time I finished calculating the total, my stomach had tightened into a knot. Nearly $18,000 had quietly disappeared. Jesus! I whispered under my breath. Behind me, footsteps creaked on the staircase. I closed the laptop halfway, my heart jumping as Graham walked into the kitchen. He looked freshly showered, sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows, tie draped loosely around his neck. "Morning," he said casually. "Morning," I replied. He reached for the coffee machine and poured himself a mug. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked. "Not really." He glanced over his shoulder. "Still thinking about work stuff?" "Something like that." He leaned against the counter and took a sip of coffee. I watched him for a moment. The calmness in his posture irritated me. It was the same composure he had used the night before, the same ease that made his lies sound like normal conversation. "Graham," I said slowly. "Yeah." "I checked the bank account this morning." He paused for a fraction of a second. It was subtle, barely visible. But I saw it. "What about it?" he asked. "There are a lot of withdrawals." He shrugged. "Okay." "Small ones," I continued, "but frequent." He sipped his coffee again. "Right." I crossed my arms. "About $18,000 worth." He lowered the mug slightly. Then he smiled. "Ah, those." My eyebrows lifted. "Those?" "Yeah," he said casually. "Business opportunities." "Business opportunities?" He nodded. "Short-term investments." "You didn't mention them. They weren't finalized yet." "Graham," I said quietly, "it's $18,000. He sighed like a man forced to explain something obvious. "Elena, relax. Relax. They're temporary transfers. I'll move the returns back once everything settles." "To where?" "Accounts." "What accounts?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "You're overthinking this." I stared at him. "You moved money out of our joint account without telling me." "It's our money," he replied. "Exactly." He shrugged again. "And I manage the household finances." Something in his tone irritated me more than the withdrawal itself. It was the assumption, the quiet belief that explanation was optional. I leaned against the counter. "You didn't think I'd notice?" He chuckled lightly. "I didn't think it mattered." I let that sit between us for a moment. Then he changed the subject abruptly. "Actually," he said, "that reminds me of something." My stomach tightened. "What?" He walked over and pulled a chair out from the table. "You should probably organize your financial stuff too." "My stuff?" "Yeah." He sat down and gestured toward the laptop. "You know, accounts, passwords, assets." I blinked. "Why?" "In case something happens." "What kind of something?" Emergency. Graham, I said slowly, since when are you interested in my personal accounts? He leaned back in his chair. We're married. So it's smart to have everything in one place. That's new. He smirked. You think I'm plotting something? The question landed too directly. I felt my chest tighten. I didn't say that. You're acting like I robbed a bank. You moved $18,000. And it's still within our finances. That's not the point. He stood up and carried his mug to the sink. Elena, he said patiently, you're getting worked up over nothing. I watched his reflection in the kitchen window. Then show me the investment accounts. He paused. Then he turned around slowly. Do you not trust me? The question hit harder than I expected. It was such a classic move. Redirect the doubt. Turn suspicion into betrayal. I didn't say that, I repeated. Sure sounds like it. I asked a simple question. And I answered it. No, I said. You avoided it. He walked back toward me, his expression sharpening slightly. You've never cared about the financial details before. That doesn't mean I shouldn't. You're suddenly auditing me? I'm asking about money we share. He exhaled sharply. This is ridiculous. Is it? Yes. The room went quiet. For a moment we just stared at each other. Finally he spoke again. Look, he said, softening his voice. I'm trying to make things easier for us. How? By consolidating things. Consolidating. Accounts. Which accounts? Everything. The word landed heavily. I felt a strange chill creep through my chest. Everything. I repeated. Yeah. He leaned against the counter again, studying me. You have your savings. Your investments. Your inheritance accounts. So we should organize them. Into what? One place. And whose place would that be? His eyes flickered. Legally ours. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Fear stopped feeling chaotic. It started feeling precise. This wasn't about convenience. This wasn't about organization. This was preparation. Careful preparation. You want access to my accounts, I said. I want transparency. You've never asked for this before. Well, maybe I should have. I looked at him carefully. You're planning something. His jaw tightened. That's paranoid. Is it? Yes. Then why are you suddenly interested in my assets? He laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. Elena, it's called being responsible. Responsible for what? For our future. The words sounded rehearsed, like something prepared in advance. I studied his face, the calm eyes, the relaxed posture, the controlled tone. For years I had believed that composure meant honesty. Now I realized something unsettling. Could also mean practice. You want a list? I asked. He nodded. Just basic details. Accounts. Right. Passwords. Sure. And asset records. That would help. I closed the laptop slowly. I'll think about it. His expression shifted slightly. Think about it? Yes. It's not a big deal. Then it can wait. His fingers tapped the counter. For the first time that morning, I saw irritation flash across his face. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Maybe. Elena. I said I'll think about it. The tension stretched between us. Finally, he shook his head. Fine. He grabbed his briefcase from the hallway chair. I have a meeting anyway. He paused by the door. You're reading too much into things. Maybe. He opened the door. Don't let your imagination ruin a perfectly normal situation. The door closed behind him. The house fell silent. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time. Then I opened the laptop again and looked at the transactions. The pattern was too clean, too controlled, too intentional. Graham wasn't stumbling toward divorce. He was preparing for it. Carefully, quietly, strategically. And while I had been loving him in the ordinary ways that build a marriage, remembering his coffee order, defending him to friends, believing his exhaustion, he had been measuring something else entirely. How much of me he could legally remove from my life. I stared at the screen and whispered to the empty kitchen. Okay. The words sounded small, but inside my chest something had already hardened. Hope would have made me slow, and slowness would have destroyed me. That evening, Graham came home carrying expensive takeout and a smile that would have fooled anyone who had not heard him whisper in the dark. I thought we could have dinner in, he said as he set the bags on the kitchen island. Long day. I looked up from the glass of water in my hand. That's generous. He gave me a half smile. You say that like I'm never generous. I almost laughed at the cruelty of that sentence. Instead, I said, You've been busy lately. He loosened his tie and opened one of the containers. Busy doesn't mean I can't bring my wife dinner. My wife. The phrase landed strangely now. Too polished. Too convenient. Like something he wore when it suited him. I forced myself to move normally. I helped lay out the food, plates, forks, napkins. Graham talked about traffic, a client meeting, some disagreement at the office that he acted out with easy humor. He was good. Better than I had ever fully admitted. If I had not already seen the pattern beneath him, I might have believed this version of him was real. You're quiet, he said, looking at me over his wine glass. I'm tired. You've been tired a lot lately. So have you. That's different. Why? He shrugged. I'm carrying a lot right now. The answer irritated me more than it should have. And I'm not? His tone softened immediately. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He leaned back in his chair, watching me carefully. Elena, are we really doing this again? I stared at him. Doing what? This thing where every sentence turns into an argument. I almost admired how smoothly he did it. He created tension, then presented himself as the reasonable one managing it. I lowered my eyes to my plate. Forget it. He held my gaze a second longer, then nodded like a man accepting peace terms. Okay. Dinner went on in fragments. Small talk. Half sentences. The occasional clink of silverware. Every now and then, Graham glanced at his phone when it buzzed against the table, turning the screen away with a movement so practiced it looked unconscious. At one point I asked, lightly, busy night for your London clients? He did not look up. You're still on that? Just curious. He set the phone down face first. You really need to stop making stories out of ordinary things. Ordinary things? I picked up my wine and took a slow sip. You mean like disappearing withdrawals and secret calls? His expression hardened for half a second. Then he smiled. There's that imagination again. I said nothing. After dinner, he offered to clean up, which in itself was unusual enough to feel staged. I stood by the sink drying plates while he loaded the dishwasher. You know, he said casually, we should probably take a weekend away soon. I looked at him. A weekend away? Yeah. Somewhere quiet. Maybe Vermont. Maybe the Berkshires. The suggestion was so out of rhythm with everything else that it made the back of my neck prickle. Why now? He closed the dishwasher and turned toward me. Does there need to be a reason? Yes. He laughed once. Because couples take trips, Elena. Couples who are fine take trips. Couples who are hiding something usually suggest scenery. He stared at me for a beat too long. Then he dried his hands and walked toward me slowly. You really think I'm hiding something? I did not answer. He stopped close enough for me to smell his cologne. Say it. I think you've changed. That's not the same thing. It is when you won't tell me why. His jaw flexed. Then, just as quickly, he softened, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear in a gesture that should have felt intimate. "I'm under pressure," he said quietly. "That's all. And whatever this is," he gestured vaguely between us, "it's making everything worse." I stepped back before he could touch my face again. Then maybe honesty would help. A long silence followed. Finally he exhaled and shook his head. "I'm going to shower." "Of course," I said. He picked up his phone, glanced at the screen, then for the first time in weeks, set it down on the coffee table and walked upstairs without it. The moment he disappeared, my entire body went still. I stared at the phone from across the room. He never left it behind. Never. The house was quiet except for the sound of water starting upstairs. I told myself not to move. Not to become this person. Not to cross whatever line still existed between suspicion and proof. Then the screen lit up. A message notification bloomed against the dark glass. "Camilla Voss. Keep her calm. We're almost ready." For a second, the room tilted. I crossed the floor so quickly I barely felt my feet. My fingers were cold when I picked up the phone. I did not unlock it. I did not need to. The preview was enough. "Keep her calm. We're almost ready." Her. Not Elena. Not your wife. Her. My chest tightened so sharply I had to inhale through my teeth. A dozen explanations tried to rise, and each one died before it fully formed. Business. Legal paperwork. A surprise. A misunderstanding. But there was no innocence in that sentence. It was the language of coordination, of timing, of handling risk. I was the risk. I was being managed inside my own marriage. The shower upstairs shut off. Panic shot through me so fast my hands nearly failed me. I placed the phone exactly where it had been, angled the same way, screen down. Then I sat on the sofa, folded my hands in my lap, and stared at the blank television. A minute later, Graham came downstairs toweling his hair. "Did you pick something to watch?" he asked. I looked up at him. He was relaxed, barefoot, casual, looking like a man returning to an ordinary evening. "Not yet." He smiled faintly. "You okay?" "Yes." "Sure." I nodded. He grabbed his phone and unlocked it. His eyes flicked over the screen for a fraction of a second. No visible reaction. If the message bothered him, he hid it perfectly. Then he looked back at me. "You seem off." I almost said, "I just found out I'm a problem to be solved." Instead I said, "Headache." He walked over and kissed my forehead. "You should get some sleep." The tenderness of it nearly made me sick. Later, in bed, he reached for me the way he always did when he wanted to seem close without actually being known. One arm over my waist. One absent-minded kiss near my temple. "Good night," he murmured. "Good night." He fell asleep quickly. I did not. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling while the city outside breathed through distant traffic and the occasional siren. Beside me, Graham's breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep. It felt obscene that he could rest like that. My mind began pulling apart the last year with cruel precision. The anniversary dinner he canceled because a client needed him urgently. The phone he started taking onto the balcony. The unexplained transfers. The sudden interest in my private accounts. The new politeness after coldness, as if he kept remembering he needed me cooperative. Every time I had felt uneasy and then scolded myself for it. Every time I had chosen trust because the alternative felt too ugly. I turned my head and looked at him in the dark. "Who are you?" I thought. Not the man who held my hand when my father was dying. Not the man who once whispered, "I'll never let anything happen to you." Or maybe he was exactly that man. Maybe this had always been inside him, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. Comfort often hides what crisis reveals. Around 3 a.m, I got out of bed and went downstairs barefoot. The house was cold and silent. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, breathing through the nausea. Then I did something I had not done in months. I called someone. My best friend, Naomi. She answered on the fourth ring, groggy and alarmed. Elena? What happened? I'm sorry, I whispered. No, don't apologize. What's wrong? I swallowed, but my throat felt raw. I think Graham is planning something. There was a pause as sleep left her voice entirely. What kind of something? I don't know everything yet. My hand shook against the counter. But there's money missing. Secret calls. And tonight I saw a message. What message? I closed my eyes. From a woman named Camilla Voss. It said, keep her calm. We're almost ready. Naomi inhaled sharply. Oh my God. I know. Elena. That's not normal. I know. Do you think he's having an affair? I don't know. My voice cracked on the last word. I almost wish it were only that. Naomi was quiet for a second. Then she said carefully, listen to me. Do not confront him yet. I wasn't planning to. Good. Because if he's planning something financial or legal, you need information before you give him warning. I let out a shaky breath. You think I'm not overreacting? Overreacting, she said sharply. No. I think you've probably been underreacting for months. That hurt because it was true. I slid down into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly exhausted. I feel stupid. Don't. I should have seen this earlier. Maybe, Naomi said softly. But loving someone is not stupidity, Elena. Trusting your husband is not stupidity. What he does with that trust is on him. I pressed my fingers to my eyes. What do I do now? I asked. First, you breathe. Then you start documenting everything. Dates, messages, transactions, anything you can verify. I saw the message, but I don't have proof. That's okay. Start with what you do have. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Naomi's voice gentled. Are you safe there tonight? I looked toward the dark staircase. Yes. Can you stay with me tomorrow? Not yet. If I leave too soon, he'll know I know something. You're right, she said. Then stay calm. Stay smart. The phrase pierced me. Keep her calm. For a second, I couldn't speak. Elena, Naomi said. I'm here. You're not alone in this. I looked out the kitchen window at the faint reflection of myself in the glass. Pale face. Bare feet. Hair loose around my shoulders. I barely recognized the woman staring back. I think something ended tonight, I said quietly. What do you mean? My illusion. Naomi was silent. Then she said, sometimes that's the first thing that has to die. When I finally returned to bed, Graham shifted in his sleep and reached for me without waking. His hand landed lightly against my arm, familiar and terrible. I did not move it away. I did not lean into it either. I simply lay there, awake, understanding something I had spent too long avoiding. The deepest violence in some marriages is not always physical. It is psychological. It is the slow rearranging of your reality until your instincts begin to feel like defects. It is being studied by the person who promised to protect you. It is being handled when you thought you were being loved. By the time dawn began to pale the curtains, the woman who had begged herself not to be paranoid was gone. In her place was someone quieter, sadder, and far more dangerous. The following morning, Graham placed a packet of documents in front of me over breakfast as if he were offering me the morning newspaper. His tone was casual, almost gentle. I was thinking, he said, stirring his coffee slowly, we should get some financial housekeeping done. I looked down at the stack of papers between us. Housekeeping, I repeated. Yeah. He pushed the packet slightly closer to me. Routine legal stuff. Asset protection. Married couples should really organize these things earlier than we do. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft clink of his spoon against the porcelain cup. I lifted the first page. At first glance it looked harmless, legal language, dense paragraphs, neutral wording. But the deeper I read, the colder my hands became. Property transfer agreements, asset consolidation clauses, authorization forms, my inheritance accounts, my investment portfolios, the apartment in Back Bay that my father had helped me buy years before Graham ever appeared in my life. Everything moved under his legal authority. I placed the page down slowly. "Graham," I said quietly, "what is this?" He leaned back in his chair. "Like I said, asset protection. This transfers control of my accounts." "Joint control," he corrected smoothly. "No," I said, tapping the page, "legal authority." He smiled like I was misunderstanding a simple concept. "Elena, you're reading it too literally. It's a legal document. That's how legal documents look." I kept my voice steady. "You want me to sign over my inheritance?" He sighed as if I were being unreasonable. "It's not signing it over. It's consolidating assets. Into your name. Into our structure." I met his eyes. "Why now?" "Because it's smart. You've never mentioned this before. Because it never mattered before. And now it does?" He spread his hands. "Things change." That sentence echoed strangely inside my chest. Yes, I thought. They do. I flipped through the rest of the packet slowly, pretending to read while watching his expression over the top of the pages. He looked patient, confident, almost amused. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm reading. It's pretty standard." "Standard for who?" "For couples who plan long term." "You mean couples preparing for divorce?" His smile vanished for half a second. Then it returned. "That's dramatic." "Is it?" "Yes." I set the packet down carefully. "You want me to sign these today?" "If possible. That seems urgent. It's just efficient." I leaned back in my chair and folded my arms. "Why are you suddenly so interested in my personal assets?" "Because we're married." "That didn't bother you for the last 8 years." He tilted his head slightly. "You're being defensive. And you're being vague." A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "Elena, this isn't a fight." "No? No. It's paperwork." "You want legal authority over everything I own." "That's not what it says." "That's exactly what it says." He rubbed his temples as if I were exhausting him. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The calmness of his tone was almost impressive. He genuinely believed he could talk me into this. "You trust me, don't you?" he said. There it was. The oldest weapon in the world. Trust. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled. Not warmly. Not coldly. Just enough. "You know what, Graham?" "What?" "You're right." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "I need time to think about this." His fingers drummed against the table. "Time?" "Yes." "It's not complicated." "It's still legal." He studied my face. "How long?" "A few days." "That seems unnecessary." "Then it shouldn't be a problem." The silence between us thickened. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "Fine." I gathered the papers and stacked them neatly. "I'll look them over." "Good." He stood up and grabbed his briefcase. "But don't take too long," he added casually. "These things work better when they're done quickly." "I'm sure they do." He walked toward the door, then paused. "You're not upset, are you?" I shook my head gently. "No." He watched me carefully. "You seemed tense earlier." "I'm just tired." His expression softened. "Maybe take the day off." "Maybe." He nodded once. "See you tonight." The door closed behind him. The house fell silent. I stayed at the kitchen table for almost a full minute. Then I exhaled slowly. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From clarity. I picked up the documents again and read them more carefully this time. The structure was elegant. Predatory, but elegant. If I signed, Graham would legally control the majority of my financial assets. If he filed for divorce afterward, those assets would become marital property, which meant he could walk away with half of everything I had built long before he existed in my life. I set the papers down and laughed quietly. God, you really thought I wouldn't read this? 30 minutes later, I was sitting in my car outside a law office in downtown Boston. The name on the building directory read, Marianne Doyle, Family Law. Inside, the office smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee. A receptionist looked up from her desk. Good morning. Do you have an appointment? I called earlier, I said. Elena Whitmore. She nodded. Ms. Doyle will see you now. Marianne Doyle's office was bright and orderly. She looked to be in her early 50s, sharp-eyed and calm in a way that suggested she had seen everything a marriage could break into. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Please sit. I placed Graham's packet of documents in front of her. She opened it and began reading. The room was silent except for the faint rustle of paper. After several minutes, she looked up. Did you sign this? No. Good. Her tone carried quiet approval. My husband asked you to? Yes. When? This morning. Did he explain why? Financial consolidation. She gave a dry smile. That's one way to phrase it. I swallowed. My husband is preparing to strip me of everything before he files for divorce. Saying it out loud made my chest tighten. For a moment I expected embarrassment or disbelief. Marianne showed neither. Instead, she nodded slowly. How long have you suspected this? A few days. Any unusual financial activity? Yes. Phone calls? Secret meetings? Yes. She closed the folder. Then we should move quickly. I felt my shoulders tense. What do? We protect you. How? First, she said calmly, we separate your personal assets from anything he could legally claim. Is that possible? Yes. But timing matters. How much time do we have? She looked directly at me. If he hasn't filed yet, we have enough. Relief and grief hit me at the same time. Okay. She pulled out another set of documents. We'll move your personal holdings into protected legal structures. Trust accounts. Asset shields. Will he know? Not immediately. And later? He'll find out when it's too late. I nodded slowly. Good. She slid the first page toward me. Read this carefully. My hands trembled slightly as I took the pen. You're sure this works? I asked. Marianne met my eyes. Elena, I've been doing this for 25 years. And? Men who prepare traps rarely expect their wives to move first. I signed the first page, then the second, then the third. Each signature felt strange. Heavy. Not because I doubted myself. Because each one felt like closing a door. At one point Marianne asked gently, Are you okay? I exhaled slowly. I'm grieving. That's normal. I thought I was protecting my marriage. And now? I'm protecting myself. She nodded. That's the right instinct. By the time we finished, the sun outside had begun to dip toward evening. Marianne closed the final folder. It's done. That quickly? Yes. What happens next? She folded her hands. Now we wait. For what? For your husband to make his move. I stood up slowly. And when he does? Marianne smiled faintly. Then he'll realize the board has already changed. I left the office with a strange feeling of both relief and loss. Because every document I had signed was a shield. But it was also a farewell. I wasn't just protecting money. I was burying the marriage I thought I had. 1 week later, Graham finally said the words he had been circling for months. It happened in our dining room on a quiet Thursday evening, the same room where we had once celebrated anniversaries and birthdays with candles and wine. The table between us was polished, spotless, almost ceremonial. Graham sat across from me with a glass of whiskey in his hand. His posture was composed, prepared. I knew that look now. He had practiced this. "Elena," he began softly, "we need to talk." I set my fork down and folded my hands. "Okay." He exhaled slowly, as if this conversation was difficult for him. "I've been thinking a lot about us." I waited. "And I think we both know things haven't been working for a while." His tone was measured, gentle, the tone of a man trying to appear compassionate. "We've grown apart," he continued. "It happens. Sometimes two people simply stop moving in the same direction." I watched him carefully. "You're saying you want a divorce?" He nodded slowly. "I think separation would be best for both of us." Best for both of us? Yes. And this realization came suddenly? No, he admitted. It's been building. Of course it had. Months of planning rarely appear overnight. He leaned forward slightly. "But I want to handle this like adults," he added. "Clean. Civil. No unnecessary conflict." "Clean," I repeated. "Yes." His voice softened further. "If we cooperate, this doesn't have to get ugly." I almost admired the performance. "You've thought this through," I said. "I have." "And you've already spoken to a lawyer." He didn't deny it. I wanted to be prepared. Prepared. That word again. "And what does this preparation look like?" I asked. He set his glass down. "Well, we divide the marital assets fairly." Fairly? Yes. The house. The house. The car. The car. And my accounts? His eyes flickered briefly. "Those too? Even the ones I had before we met?" His jaw tightened slightly. "Legally, those can still be considered part of the marital estate depending on how they've been handled." I nodded slowly. "So this is the plan. Elena." "You asked for control of my assets last week," I continued calmly, "and when I don't sign, you file for divorce." "That's not why." "No? No. Then why ask for those papers?" He leaned back in his chair. "I was trying to simplify things. For you. For us." I tilted my head slightly. "You really think I didn't see it?" A silence settled over the table. He studied me carefully now. "What do you mean?" I took a slow breath. Then I said the sentence that shattered his certainty. "I already moved my assets." For the first time in 8 years of marriage, Graham Whitmore looked stunned. It was subtle. Most people would have missed it. But I saw the exact moment his confidence cracked. "What?" he said quietly. "I moved them last week." His eyes narrowed. "You moved? What exactly?" "My inheritance accounts." "And?" "My investments." "And?" "The Back Bay apartment." His posture stiffened. "You transferred them?" "Yes." "To where?" "Protected structures." "Protected from what?" "From you." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush the room. His fingers slowly curled around the edge of the table. "You're bluffing." "No. You couldn't have moved everything that fast." "I could." "Without telling me?" "Yes." "That's illegal." "No," I replied calmly. "It isn't." His breathing changed. It became sharper. Controlled. "You went behind my back," he said. The irony almost made me laugh. "You mean the way you've been doing for months?" His eyes hardened. "You're making a mistake." "I don't think so." "Elena," he said, lowering his voice, "you're letting paranoia guide your decisions." "No," I said quietly. "I'm letting evidence guide them." He stood up suddenly and walked to the window. The city lights of Boston stretched outside like a glittering grid of calm. "You're overreacting," he muttered. I'm protecting myself. You didn't even talk to me. You weren't interested in talking. He turned back toward me. This is going to make things complicated. They already were. You think hiding assets will protect you in court? I didn't hide them. What did you do then? I protected what was already mine. He stared at me as if trying to calculate something. You've changed, he said. Have I? Yes. You mean I stopped trusting you? That's not fair. Fair. I laughed softly. You planned this for months. I didn't plan anything. You prepared divorce papers before even mentioning separation. That's called being responsible. That's called a strategy. His voice sharpened. You're twisting this. No, I said calmly. I'm seeing it clearly. He picked up his whiskey again and drained the glass. This isn't over. I didn't expect it to be. The next morning proved exactly how right I was. At 9:15 a.m., someone knocked on the front door. 3 short, formal knocks. When I opened it, a man in a navy blazer stood on the steps holding a large envelope. Mrs. Elena Whitmore? Yes. You've been served. The words landed without drama. Just paperwork. I closed the door and opened the envelope at the kitchen counter. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Graham had officially filed for divorce. I skimmed the document quickly. Half the house. Half the joint accounts. Half the assets. Then I reached the final line. Spousal support request. I stared at the page in disbelief. You've got to be kidding me, I whispered. 10 minutes later I was sitting in Marianne Doyle's office again. She read the papers quickly. Then she leaned back in her chair. Well, she said calmly, he's certainly ambitious. He's asking for half of everything. Yes. And spousal support. That part is particularly bold. Can he actually get it? She shook her head. Not if the financial records say what I think they say. They do. She tapped the document with her pen. He's assuming your assets were still accessible when he filed. They weren't. Exactly. Relief moved slowly through my chest. So his plan fails? Yes. Completely. She smiled faintly. Spectacularly. For the first time in weeks, I took a deep breath. So this is over? Marianne's expression changed slightly. Elena, what? Men like your husband don't accept defeat quietly. What does that mean? It means he's going to look for another way to hurt you. How? Reputation, career, social pressure. I felt my stomach tighten. He'll try something else. Yes. I stared out her office window at the gray Boston sky. What do we do? Marianne folded her hands. We prepare. That evening, Graham came home later than usual. He didn't greet me. He didn't speak. He simply walked into the living room and poured himself a drink. Finally, he looked at me. You really think you've won something? I met his gaze. I think I protected myself. His lips curved into a cold smile. You think this is finished? No, I said quietly. I don't. He lifted his glass. Good, he said softly. Because I'm not done yet. The chill in his voice made something inside my chest tighten. I realized then what Marianne had meant. Men like Graham do not retreat. They attack what they can no longer own. And the war between us had only just begun. The first sign that Graham had changed strategies came quietly. Too quietly. It was a Monday morning, and when I walked into my firm's office in downtown Boston, the atmosphere felt different. Not hostile. Just strange. 2 associates who usually greeted me with easy smiles suddenly became very interested in their laptops. A conversation near the coffee machine stopped mid-sentence when I passed by. I slowed my steps. Something was wrong. At first I tried to dismiss it. Divorce rumors travel fast in professional circles. People gossip. People speculate. But by mid-morning, the silence had turned into something heavier. My assistant, Rachel, knocked on my office door around 10. She stepped inside hesitantly. "Elena, do you have a minute?" "Of course," I said, closing the file in front of me. "What's going on?" She closed the door behind her. Her expression made my stomach tighten. "What is it?" I asked. Rachel shifted her weight uncomfortably. I wasn't sure if I should say anything. "Rachel," she sighed. "There's a rumor going around." "What kind of rumor?" She hesitated. "People are saying you moved money out of your joint accounts." "That part is true. That you did it secretly." I folded my hands together. "That's also technically true." She swallowed. "They're saying you did it to hide assets." My chest tightened. "From who?" "From your husband." I stared at her. "That's convenient." Rachel nodded nervously. "There's more." "Of course there is." She lowered her voice. "Someone told people you falsified financial records." I felt the air leave my lungs. "What?" "They're saying the transfers were illegal." I leaned back slowly in my chair. "Who is saying this?" Rachel looked at me carefully. "Your husband." For a moment I didn't speak. The audacity of it was almost impressive. "He's been talking to people?" I asked quietly. "Yes." "Who?" "Some of the partners heard it through legal circles." My stomach twisted. "And you believed it?" I asked gently. Her eyes widened. "No. Of course not." "Good. But the story is spreading." I nodded slowly. "Of course it is." Rachel bit her lip. "Are you okay?" "No," I said honestly, but I forced a small smile. "I will be." After she left, I sat alone in my office for a long time. The Boston skyline stretched outside my window, gray and cold under the winter sky. Whispers. Rumors. Speculation. I could handle divorce. I could handle legal battles. But public humiliation was something else entirely. Around 6 that evening, after most of the office had gone home, my phone rang. Marianne Doyle. I answered immediately. "Elena," she said, her voice unusually serious. "I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning." "What's wrong?" Graham filed something. My chest tightened. "What kind of filing?" "A financial complaint." "Against me?" "Yes." "On what grounds?" She exhaled. "He's accusing you of financial misconduct." My fingers tightened around the phone. "What kind of misconduct?" "He's claiming you falsified records and moved funds illegally." For a moment the room tilted. "That's insane." "I know. What evidence does he have?" "That's the problem." "What?" "He submitted documents." I closed my eyes. "What kind of documents?" "Financial statements. Transaction reports." "Fake ones?" "Yes." My voice dropped. "Who made them?" Marianne didn't hesitate. "Camilla Voss." The name hit me like ice water. "The woman texting him," I whispered. "You knew about her?" "I saw a message once." "She's a financial consultant." "A crooked one." Marianne's tone hardened. "Possibly." I took a slow breath. "What happens now?" "The court will review the complaint." "And if they believe it?" "You could face an investigation." My chest tightened painfully. "You mean criminal?" "Potentially." I pressed my fingers against my temple. "This is bigger than divorce." "Yes," Marianne said quietly. "This is annihilation." For the first time since this nightmare began, real fear entered my chest. "Not for my money. For my life." "What do we do?" I asked. "First," she said, "we examine their evidence. And if it looks real, then we find the flaw." The next morning I arrived at Marianne's office before she did. When she walked in 15 minutes later, She looked calm, but focused. "Sit," she said. I dropped into the chair across from her desk. "Tell me something good." She opened a folder. "I might have something better than good." My heart pounded. "What?" "We had a forensic analyst review the documents." "And?" She slid a printed report across the desk. "They're fake." Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. "You're sure?" "Absolutely." "How can you tell?" She pointed to a section of the report. "Look here." I leaned closer. These account numbers didn't exist at the time of the supposed transactions. My eyebrows shot up. They forged statements for accounts that weren't even open yet. "Exactly." I stared at the paper. "That's unbelievably sloppy." "Yes." "Why would they make such a basic mistake?" "Because they assumed no one would check." The anger that rose inside me was sudden and fierce. They tried to destroy my reputation with fake evidence. "Yes." "They tried to turn me into a criminal." "Yes." I looked up at Marianne. "What happens now?" She leaned back slightly. "Now we go on offense." I felt something shift inside my chest. Until this moment, I had been reacting, defending, surviving. But Marianne was right. Silence would only reward him. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "We countersue." "For what?" "Defamation." "And?" "Falsification of legal evidence." My pulse quickened. "That could ruin them." "Yes." "Both of them?" "Graham and Camilla." I sat there quietly for a moment. Then I nodded. "Do it." Marianne studied my face. "You're sure?" "Yes." "Because once we start this, it becomes very public." "It already is. And it will get ugly." "It already is." She smiled slightly. "Fair enough." She picked up her pen. "Then let's bury them." 2 weeks later, Graham and I stood across from each other in a courtroom. He looked confident. Still. Arrogant. His lawyer began presenting the accusations. "Your Honor, we have evidence suggesting Mrs. Whitmore manipulated financial records." Marianne stood. "With respect, Your Honor, those documents are fraudulent." The room grew quiet. The forensic analyst took the stand. He explained every flaw, every inconsistency, every fake timestamp. I watched Graham carefully as the truth unfolded. The moment realization hit him was subtle, but unmistakable. His lawyer leaned toward him and whispered urgently. Graham's jaw tightened. The judge looked down at the documents. These records reference accounts that did not exist at the time of the alleged transactions. "Yes, Your Honor," Marianne said calmly. The judge's expression hardened. Motion denied. A sharp strike of the gavel echoed through the room. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the court will review the possibility of sanctions for submitting falsified evidence." For the first time, Graham looked pale. When the hearing ended, he walked past me in the hallway without speaking. But just before he reached the exit, he stopped. He turned slightly. "You think this makes you the winner?" I met his eyes calmly. "I think it makes me the truth." His lips curled faintly. "You're enjoying this?" "No." "Then why fight so hard?" I held his gaze. "Because silence would mean you win." For a moment he said nothing. Then he turned and walked away. Later that night, I sat alone in my apartment watching the city lights shimmer across the Boston skyline. My sadness hadn't disappeared. Probably never would. But something else had changed. Until now, I had been the woman trying to survive what Graham had done to me. Now I was the woman documenting every lie, every manipulation, every calculated wound. And for the first time since the whisper in the hallway, I realized something important. My grief was still there, but it had learned how to stand upright. The final hearing took place on a cold Boston morning beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of a courtroom that seemed determined to expose every flaw a person carried inside them. I sat beside Marianne Doyle at the long wooden table while Graham took his place across the room with his lawyer. He wore the same navy suit he had worn during the first hearing, the same perfectly knotted tie, the same calm expression that had once convinced me he could solve any problem. 4 years, that composure had made me feel safe. Now I understood what it really was. Confidence built on manipulation. Marianne leaned toward me and spoke quietly. "Ready?" I nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." She gave a small approving smile. "Good. Because this ends today." Across the courtroom, Graham met my eyes briefly. His expression was unreadable, but I could see the tension in his jaw. He still believed he could control the outcome. Men like him rarely stop believing that until the moment reality forces them to. The judge entered the room and the bailiff called for silence. "Court is now in session." The hearing began. Graham's attorney stood first. "Your Honor, my client maintains that Mrs. Whitmore engaged in questionable financial transfers intended to conceal marital assets." Marianne rose before he finished. "Your Honor, the defense would like to present new evidence before further claims are made." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Marianne gestured toward the forensic analyst seated behind us. "Dr. Harris, please take the stand." The analyst stepped forward and took his seat. Marianne began calmly. "Dr. Harris, you examined the financial documents submitted by Mr. Whitmore and Ms. Camilla Voss. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And what did your analysis reveal?" Dr. Harris adjusted his glasses. "The documents are fabricated." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Graham's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Marianne continued. "Could you explain how you determined that?" Dr. Harris turned a page in his report. The financial statements reference account structures that did not exist on the dates listed. The judge frowned. "Meaning?" "The alleged transactions could not have occurred because the accounts themselves had not yet been opened." Silence filled the courtroom. Marianne turned slightly toward Graham's table. "So to be clear," she said, "the documents accusing my client of misconduct were falsified." "Yes," Dr. Harris said plainly. Graham's lawyer stood abruptly. "Your Honor." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down." The gavel tapped once on the bench. "Continue, Ms. Doyle." Marianne nodded. "Your Honor, these falsified records were submitted as legal evidence. We therefore request dismissal of the claims and sanctions for the deliberate submission of fraudulent documentation." The judge turned to Graham. "Mr. Whitmore, were you aware these records were falsified?" For the first time, Graham hesitated. His lawyer leaned toward him and whispered urgently. Finally, Graham spoke. "I relied on information provided by my financial consultant." "Ms. Camilla Voss?" the judge asked. "Yes." "And did you verify that information before filing this complaint?" Another pause. "No." The judge's expression hardened. That was an extraordinary failure of due diligence. Marianne spoke again. "Your Honor, beyond dismissal, we are formally filing a countersuit for defamation and falsification of legal evidence." Graham's head snapped toward her. "What?" he said under his breath. Marianne didn't even look at him. The judge nodded slowly. "Given the circumstances, this court will allow the countersuit to proceed." The gavel struck sharply. "The original claims are dismissed." A wave of quiet relief moved through my chest. But the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he continued, "Mr. Whitmore will be responsible for all legal fees related to the filing of these fraudulent accusations." Graham's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd," he muttered. The judge looked down at him. "No, Mr. Whitmore. Submitting false evidence to this court is absurd." The gavel struck again. "Court is adjourned." Just like that, it was over. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with quiet conversations as people filtered out. Marianne gathered her documents and looked at me. "Well," she said, I exhaled slowly. That's it. That's it. I felt strangely calm. No fireworks, I said. She smiled faintly. Real victories rarely have them. Across the hall, Graham stood speaking with his lawyer in tense whispers. When he noticed me watching, he ended the conversation abruptly and walked toward the exit. As he passed me, he slowed. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "You think this makes you better than me?" I met his gaze without anger. No. Then what was all this for? For the truth. His eyes narrowed. You could have just walked away. You tried to destroy my reputation. He shrugged faintly. People exaggerate in divorce. You forged evidence. That wasn't my decision, but it was your strategy. For a moment he looked almost tired. You always did think you were smarter than everyone else, he said. I shook my head gently. No. Then what? I just stopped pretending you were. He stared at me for a long second. Then he turned and walked away. Watching him leave felt strange. Not triumphant. Just quiet. Later that evening I stood alone on the balcony of my apartment overlooking the Charles River. The water reflected the city lights in long, wavering lines. The cold air felt clean against my face. My phone buzzed on the small table beside me. Unknown number. I stared at it for a moment. Then I picked it up and blocked the number without answering. No dramatic speech. No confrontation. Just silence. Inside the apartment, the rooms felt different now. Not empty. Just mine. A week later, I met Naomi for dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the North End. She raised her glass. To survival, she said. I laughed softly and clinked my glass against hers. To survival. She studied me for a moment. You look lighter. I feel lighter. Do you miss him? The question didn't hurt the way it once would have. I miss who I thought he was. That's fair. But that person never really existed. Naomi nodded slowly. What happens now? I smiled slightly. Now I rebuild. Big plans. Small ones. Like what? Sleeping without checking my phone. Drinking coffee without wondering what someone's hiding. Trusting my own instincts again. She grinned. That sounds like a pretty good life. It does. A few weeks later I returned to my office and found the atmosphere different. People spoke normally again. The rumors had faded. Truth, it turned out, traveled just as quickly as lies once the evidence caught up. Rachel poked her head into my office that afternoon. Everything okay? She asked. I smiled. Yes. Really. Really. She nodded. Good. You deserve that. Later that night I stood once more on my balcony, watching the Boston skyline stretch into the distance. The last few months had changed me. I had lost things. Trust. Certainty. The illusion that love alone protects you. But I had gained something stronger. Clarity. Strength. Control over my own life. I whispered quietly to the wind. I'm still here. And for the first time in a long time, the silence that followed didn't scare me. It felt like peace.